Hi guys, welcome to the Playwright Crash Course. We will be taking a look at the basics of the browser automation library and hopefully create a small script which would get you started. So by definition, Playwright is a Node.js library to automate Chromium, Firefox, and WebKit with a single API. If you have heard of or have any experience with Selenium, it basically is just that, but with JavaScript. If you are anything like me, you'd love this over Selenium any day because I personally am not a Java fan. Anyway, we will take a look at a few slides and then jump on to creating something. Okay, so here's why we would want to use Playwright and a few capabilities that come along with it. It is a cross-browser web automation project, so it basically just allows you to use the same script across almost all browsers. It is evergreen, capable, reliable, and fast, as is mentioned on the documentation. It supports both headless and headful executions. It handles multiple page scenarios. There are options to auto-wait for elements to be recognized and then you want to perform some actions on them. It has options to intercept network activity. It can emulate peripheral behavior, which could be accessing permissions or using a camera or something like that. It also has support for native input elements, the events that would be triggered from a mouse or a keyboard, and it can be integrated in your existing workflow as well. So consider cloud or creating a Docker image or environments which are similar to that. Like all good things, Playwright also has limitations, and those limitations are currently under review. It could probably evolve as and when the RFCs would be integrated. This library has evolved from Puppeteer, and in the future may hopefully pivot into something else with the integration of the features that aren't supported today. It doesn't extend support for the legacy Microsoft Edge browser or the Internet Explorer. The mobile support isn't native, meaning that it uses the desktop browsers to emulate mobile screens and devices, permissions and GPS and that sort of thing. It currently doesn't support Java or Ruby language bindings, but it does C# and Python, and obviously also does JavaScript and TypeScript, which is a good part. Now, Playwright isn't something you need to memorize, and you could just use the API reference as a cheat sheet and focus more on the idea that you want to automate. However, to know what it is capable of, you need to know the features that it provides. The way I see it, I've classified it in three categories, which is debugging core concepts and constructs that you are going to have to use to create your scripts. So this has all the classes, methods, and objects that you could use to do your thing. Now, obviously, there are more, but this is where you could get started. And then as and when you play around with it, you are going to have to read the documentation, and then along the way, you'll figure out, other things that you could integrate to do your testing in. With debugging, it is basically a series of flags that you're going to have to set along your script so that you can see the execution. For example, the way we could set a headless flag, and then obviously we'll see this in execution as well. The API logs are a good way to see what's going on. There are browser developer tools as well, so you could see the documentation to do that. The core concepts and the constructs are the part where you are going to have to use objects which Playwright provides us and go on to using them to actually get some interaction in the browser. Okay, that's enough talk and theory, so let's do something. Playwright has a really detailed documentation on its website, and it states all the usages and a lot of examples. I normally use the getting started guide to begin with, and I also use the dev hints XPath cheat sheet. Now, this is a good place to see illustrations of how you can select your elements on a web page. So these are the two things that I normally use while I create this. And as I said, you don't have to memorize what Playwright has to offer, and you could just figure things out as you go with reference to the documentation. To begin with, here's what you'll need. You would need Node.js, npm that comes with it. You will need to know a little bit of JavaScript versions ES6 through 8. You will need to know a little bit of how to work with XPaths to deal with the browser dev tools, and an IDE of your choice. For this video, we'll use npm, and the IDE of my choice is Visual Studio Code. So the first thing we'll do is do npm install Playwright. And we'll also use a dev dependency flag so that it'll add that to the JSON file. Depending on whether or not you've installed it already, it'll go faster for you. And I will go ahead and create a JavaScript file, just name it main.js, and obviously it could be any name. To start, we will need to import Chromium or any other browser binary that Playwright provides us. So let's do const require Playwright, and we'll add in Chromium. You could also do WebKit or Firefox here. Doesn't matter. Since it is cross-browser automation, it'll work for all of them. Now, the boilerplate that we need to begin with is executed with an IFI. Now, if you don't know what an IFI is, I would recommend that you read up a little bit on it, and I'll also leave a reference down below. For now though, just know that these functions are invoked immediately. So let's set that up with an anonymous function. First thing we'll need to do is create a browser instance to launch. So we'll do const browser equals chromium dot and the launch method. The next thing we'll need is a context. So the reason for us to use new context every time is that we always want to start from the beginning and not use an existing session. For instance, if you're already logged into a website, you always want to start testing from the first page itself, from the sign-in page that is. So we'll do context equals browser dot new context. These statements are going to return promises, so we will have to do an async await on each one of these. The reason that we do this is to make things synchronous. So every other promise is going to be asynchronous, and to bring the execution in sync, we use the async await mechanism. The next thing is to do a const page variable on which we will be using the elements and performing interactions through. So we do const page await context dot new page. Now, since this is set up, the next natural progression would be to navigate to a page. So we'll use the existing page variable dot go to and the URL of the page that we want to navigate to. Again, let's not forget the O8. And for the sake of this video, we'll be using one of my previous projects, an app that takes in your weight and height and returns your BMI after clicking this button here. So we'll just try to test that out. Let's grab this URL and paste it here. We should always remember to release the resources that we are using. So we'll do await browser.close at the end of it. Let's see if this runs. And the way to run it is to do node space main.js or whatever file name that you've chosen. So notice that it did run, but we couldn't see the execution. The reason for that is we haven't set any debug flags. So the flag that we need to set is by the name of headless, and we set that to false. And the speed of execution by slow-mo, and I'll set that to 100. You could also do DevTools and set this to true to always show the developer console and tools within the browser. Let's just leave that out for now. And we'll comment this out so that the browser stays open. And let's see if that runs. Okay, so it opened up on another screen. Let me grab that in. And this is the website we'll be testing. Now, since we haven't closed the browser instance, this will stay open. So we'll close this out and break the execution to uncomment this out. We need to make browser interactions such as make element clicks, enter text in an input box, or focus on some particular element, and so on and so forth. So next, we will be identifying elements on the DOM and performing actions on them. Let me bring in the website. I've opened the developer tools here to identify the XPath. You could also identify elements by using element tags and attributes, but in my experience, XPath is the most efficient. The way that you find XPath for a particular element is that if you try to focus on this one, let's say, and we want to add in something inside this text box, you need to identify that element, that input box. So we know that it's an input box, and we know that it has different attributes by the name of ID, type, step, class, etc. But the unique thing is that it has a placeholder attribute of value pounds and a few dots. So let me just copy that. And I will go by selecting the input tag. Oh, it should be input at placeholder, the attribute name here. And I'll equal that to the value that I just copied. Right? And the green highlight here indicates that you've identified it correctly. So let's just copy this XPath here, and let's do await page.click and add in the XPath. Now here you could also explicitly state that you're copying in an XPath, or you could do CSS selections and set it up like that, or just leave it unspecified for Playwright to figure it out. So if you do that, that's it. So that would click the button. And likewise, you could also do, let's copy the whole thing again. And before clicking it, let's say you want to focus on it. Some websites have elements which already demand focus, and it might not always be the first element that is focused when the page is loaded. When it is not, it is always a good idea to focus that element before you attempt to click it. Let's do that. Focus, click, and now you are going to have to fill in something. So let's do page.fill. On the same XPath, and fill actually takes two parameters, and obviously the other one would be the text that you want to fill in. So, well, my current weight is 178 pounds, so I'll put that in. And similarly, we will have to focus on another element and fill in the data for the height. Similarly, we'll use the inspect element tool, go to height. I know my height in inches, so I'm going to select that one. Input ID, the placeholder says inches here. So I'll just replace this with inches. And there you go, the green thing says I'm good to go. I'll go back here and replace all of these XPaths here with the other one. And my height in inches is 69. That's supposed to happen at the end. Let's just uncomment this until we finish our script, and so that we'll see our execution. All right, let's do this again and see whether those values are populated. All right, there we go. There's 178 and there's 69. The next thing we need to do is click this button and then read the value that will be populated in these cards. All right, so let's do that. Close this out, break this. All we got to do now is to click the calculate button here, and these cards would be populated. Just to make things interesting, let's select these values that would be populated here and write it to a text file. Now let's implement the click on the calculate button. Another way to do it is to define a variable, like let's say calc button, and then do the usual await page dot. Now we have a dollar selector. What this does is that it finds an element which matches the specified selector within that page and returns it as a result. Here, whichever identifier is passed, the element handle of that particular tag would be returned. We would add in the XPath for the calculate button, which would be button with a text of calculate. Notice that the text is a function in the XPath, and it's not an attribute that could be used with at, just as a side note. And then we could do calc button dot click. And notice that we don't have to do an await here, since it is already returned a synchronous value in here. Since we are also going to be writing it to a file, let's import the file system. Let's do const fs equals require fs. Before we write to that, we need to get those values. So to do that, let's do const result. Somehow need to get the values in, let's say, a list. What we need to do here would be await, and like we have the dollar selector, we also have a double dollar selector, so which would return an array of element handles. Well, actually it returns the promise of an array of element handles. So here it is. It says that it would return a promise of the type element handle for a particular tag. Hopefully the illustration would make more sense. And add in the selector for the index column. We will require tags which are not really uniquely identifiable, because there are going to be multiple. These 4 cards all have the index call class, so we would just use that, and the double dollar selector would return all 4 of them for us. To do that, let's do div at class index call. So result will have an array of element handles. Now notice that this is not a promise. The await makes it synchronous, so this would be just an array of element handles. To access that, we will have to loop through it. So let's do for const of res of result. Let's call it label, and here we will have to do await page dot evaluate. Now this is another new function here, and this will evaluate whether or not the function passed matches the looped value. The syntax is an element el dot inner, and what we need is the inner text. So the inner text of this card. So the whole thing would be the inner text, and it also takes another parameter, which would be the individual result. The next thing to do is to save it to an array. So let's do that again. Go outside the for loop, define array of values, let's say, an empty array here, and then we'll push the label in every loop. So we'll put values at push label. I guess that's it for the for loop, and let's use array destructuring to save it. Now this is an ES6 feature. If you're not aware of this one, you could just look up array destructuring. So we will be getting the values from values, no pun intended. The first would be the BMI. The second card is for a calorie intake, I believe. I think it's calorie intake. The other is the calorie one, and finally comments. So we will have those values extracted from the values array here. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's console log that just to be sure. And since we were going to write all of these values to a file and we've imported the file system, let's do that as well. So fs dot, now this is just plain Node.js. This would be write file, and let's create a file by the name of report.txt, and the other argument that write file takes is the actual data that you want to write to it. I just cut to where I've typed everything in. The next argument that it takes is a function to throw an error if we find one. So let's do function error, and along with this let's also console log that we have added the results to the file. Alright, I think that should be it. Let's see if all of this works. We'll run this with no main.js, and it begins values added. Now the problem is it did print out the results, but okay, so these values are printed, just the first is not. So this value is being omitted. Now my best guess is that after clicking this button, the execution does not wait for this to populate. I guess we are going to have to add in a timeout after this click button. To do that, let's do wait promise set a timeout of, I guess, 2 seconds should be enough. Let's try it out now. And it closes it out. And there you go, we get this. And it also says that it has added the results to the report. Let's go check that out. And all right, in this case here, like instead of adding in a timeout, what we can also do is use a wait for selector. Now, in most cases, the values which are populated in a web page are at times asynchronous, or in most real-time applications these values are fetched from somewhere. For Playwright to identify that element, we are going to have to wait for some time. So the mechanism to do it is to identify a frame under which that element is going to be populated, and then use the wait for selector and do something in its callback. So we'll do page.mainFrame. And notice that we don't have to do an await here because we are going to use the wait for selector, which in essence does the same thing on a specific element. So wait for, so there are other methods too, such as wait for functions, navigation, and other ones like that. We'll use the wait for selector. Now we want to identify the first element, the BMI element. So let's go here, try to get this. So we'll add in the XPath for the BMI card. This is uniquely identifiable for it using the ID. Within this, we have also used a B tag. So here it uses this ID, the BMI ID, and we're using a bold tag inside it. So we'll do //b and dot then we'll take a callback. And let's console log that the BMI selector was found. And similarly, should it fail, let's catch it and print that we could not find it. Not found. Alright, so that's the whole script. Let's try it out. Alright, so the values are populated, clicks the calculate button, and let's see. Right, so everything went as expected. It prints it out on the console. It prints it in the file with all those values in there. Also, it also prints out the callback that we specified to print out if the selector was found. Now here it would print out anyway, but in asynchronous scenarios, it would take a while, and once it identifies it, you can run your callback. Alright, that's it for this video, guys. Now there's a whole lot more with Playwright that you could do, such as emulate different mobile devices for test flows, troubleshoot network activity, and even integrate multi-page scenarios. But hopefully this should get you started. This was my first attempt in making a tutorial. I really hope you enjoyed it and got some value out of it. If you did, do consider leaving a thumbs up and sharing this with people who might find it useful as well. And rest assured, I want to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.